Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for our first ever episode of Cigars and Security, a webcast where we'll be enjoying a fine cigar and talking about some of the more pressing issues in the cybersecurity landscape. My name is Randy Watkins. I'll be the host of Cigars and Security. I'm also the CTO of CRITICALSTART, the leader in managed detection and response. With me for my first guest on this inaugural episode is Mr. Sanjay Parikh, the VP of Professional Services for CRITICALSTART. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Randy. Appreciate it.
So, Sanjay, let's get started first of all with the cigar portion of Cigars and Security. What are you smoking today?
Nice Arturo Fuente, kind of paired with a nice Scotch, a Lafroy. So nice, smoky, sweet, pairs well.
All right, very good. I am smoking a Padron 1964 anniversary, and I'm pairing that with a Kroger brand decaf. It's not as smoky, still a nice rich, bold flavor. No caffeine, so I can sleep tonight as it is about 5 o'clock Central Time. So great, well thanks for joining us. Let's get started with a quick background on you, how you got into security, what brought you here.
Well, I got into security, back in the 2000s, did a stint as a Chief Information Security Officer at Blockbuster. From there, learned all about managing security and for a company or organization. Went to Boeing, did a stint there, and then decided to move into the audit and compliance space. So spent about 7 years as a QSA, working for Fortune 100, 500 companies, and then saw what CRITICALSTART was doing and kind of ran to get involved.
Nice. Now, what was prior to, what was the precursor to actually getting into security itself?
It was more about just handling your data. So I had done a stint in development, networking, but I realized it was all about data, so protection of data. So as I progressed in my CISO job, I learned a lot about the protection of data, and so that kind of put me more on the security path.
Very cool, very cool. So let's dig into some questions here. The first one, so shout out to a couple of people. You and Jason Robaum, two of the only people I know that actually really nerd out about GRC and compliance. It's really one of those specializations that you either love or you hate, right? I mean, it's absolutely necessary, but it's one of those things that you could be interested in, maybe not. So how did you develop an interest for GRC and compliance, and what keeps you passionate, what keeps you involved, what keeps you liking this line of work as opposed to something like threat hunting?
Well, that's really a very good question. So let me give you a little background of kind of explaining. So companies, as they have their data, they really, when they get their data from their customers, it's really a trust factor. Customers are trusting companies to protect their data. And trust is a very important, and it's kind of just ingrained into a customer's expectations. But if it goes bad, it goes bad quick. Meaning we have social media, you're just seeing it today in today's world. If somebody's on the wrong side of what people believe, they're outed real quick. Investors expect a lot as far as making sure that data is protected, and so as well as auditors. But the problem is that executives expect all this data protection and compliance without spending money because they're focused on revenue. Mm-hmm. Right? So the interest for me, is why I'm interested, is because the ability to talk about compliance and the need and the expectation of why GRC is important and how it actually can be a revenue generator for the company. Because not many executives can talk about that and understand that, because that's the difference from being tactical to strategic. And that's really what keeps me passionate about it.
So let's define GRC, right? So governance, risk, and compliance. I feel that's used synonymously a lot. So for folks that are getting started in this kind of journey down GRC, what does that actually mean in terms of tasks, responsibilities, things that you're going to implement to obtain some level of GRC program?
So the first understanding is similar to either whether you're a CISO or you're part of the security group, is to understand what data your company is using, how it's used in the business, and to generate revenue, and then how it's passed along either throughout the business organizations, departments, or with other third parties. If you don't understand how the business uses your data, you're really being defensive as opposed to proactive. And you can't really, if you just attack it from different requirements, so if somebody comes and says, I'm going to share data over here, can you make sure it's secure as far as either the transmission or the storage, you're really addressing tactical issues. You're not being strategic, so you have to look at it from a holistic standpoint. And until you look at it from a holistic standpoint, you never will understand how to use data to generate revenue and why it's important to the company, and to be able to explain to the executives so that you can gain any budget or requirements that you need.
That's interesting. So I've always seen GRC maybe as a piece of security or as a different branch of security. We often see this in organizations. You have a VP of GRC, or you have a different GRC group, or that's my compliance group.
Correct.
But really what you're saying is compliance is not a separate function. It is a fundamental to build your security off of.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're not thinking that in implementing processes within your DevOps or within your projects, then you're really going to be behind as far as protecting your data. So for an example, a lot of companies, like we partner with a lot of companies, right, to share data or to sit there and implement different solutions. If we don't have compliance in place, then we're not going to have those ability to partner with these companies. So we're going to lose out on this revenue, or it's going to cost us money with contracts and requirements and expectations. Because the last thing we want to do is have one slip and not only get it affected in the marketplace from a customer standpoint, but also from a penalty from one of our contracts.
That's interesting. So compliance, GRC, instead of just viewing it as kind of a vehicle for security, it's a vehicle for business transactions, it's a vehicle for trust and relationships, it's a means to grow on that, and the compliance aspect of that is more of certifying that you have the fundamentals in place to be trusted with other people's data, or your employees' data.
Absolutely.
It's an interesting take. Second question. So an obvious trend in security is privacy, right? I mean, privacy is everywhere. GDPR really kicked this thing off and put out this broad, sweeping compliance framework. And what's more interesting is we're starting to see states build their own, right? So you got California, New York started it pretty early on with NYC, DFS Part 500. You got, who else? Nevada, Colorado. I think just about everybody's coming out with their own privacy templates. So what frameworks do you see being the most progressive, the most aggressive, the most reasonable, and do any of these hold legs to potentially become a federal framework, or at least guide a federal framework? And is there even a federal framework in the works? I mean, do you think this will turn into something that's regulated at a federal level?
So great question. So we've had privacy laws for years, since the 80s, 90s. Canada with PIPEDA, each of the different countries in APAC, in Europe, and then Europe came up with their GDPR, right? Even though we have the individual data privacy laws for all the different countries, some people don't really know, unless you're really into security, that each of the states also had their individual privacy laws. But a lot of those laws are just really about the technical aspect, how to protect data. If you have a breach, here's what you do.
Right.
But nobody really goes into a lot more than that. GDPR is one of the first ones that really came out and gave requirements that people can sit there and actually understand and implement. But what was interesting about GDPR was that they really only had they have 99 articles or 99 requirements. They really only had 2 requirements that related to the security and protection of data. The rest was really about who's affected, what type of data is affected, and here are all the business requirements. In other words, getting a customer to opt in or opt out, keeping that data, responding to customers' requests to delete their data or get a copy of their data, aspects of that. So it was a really good privacy law. California over here kind of copied that, so you had your California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, which goes into effect actually today. So yay, CCPA Day.
Happy CCPA Day, all right.
And then now you have a federal law that has been at least put on the books. It's still a bill, but it's called COPPA, Consumer Online Privacy Rights Act. It was put in late last year or early this year. Congress is voting on it. It more matches CCPA, just because it's more around those requirements, which is not as strict as GDPR, but very, very similar to GDPR. And that we definitely do need more of a federal law, because then that's only one requirement as opposed to 50 different requirements, because trying to understand what you have to do with 50 different breach laws is a pain. Yes. I can't tell you.
So, I mean, how do you see customers that you're working with, how do you see them approaching the implementation of 2, 3, 4, 5, 30 different privacy laws? I mean, we have customers that operate in multiple states that are all ratifying their own frameworks. How do you see them starting a compliance towards this, or are they not?
Right now, they're taking a holistic, or they should. They shouldn't be doing the individual laws as far as making sure they meet. They should meet it from a holistic standpoint and understand what the general security requirements are and the general breach requirements are. Because most of them are, some of them are 48-hour notice, some are 72-hour notice. So if you hit the minimum breach requirements, you're going to hit all of them, right? So understanding where data can kind of map or kind of overlap, those are the places that people need to understand how they map together.
So essentially finding the most strict of all the regulations, comply with that, and then you inherently comply with all of them.
Right.
Now, what's going to be interesting is if federal adopts a compliance framework that isn't as strict as some of the state mandated ones, in which case you could have multiple compliances that you have to.
Theoretically, but the federal law, it's already been stated that they would supersede state laws.
Very good. So, Al, let's do a cigar check-in. How's the Fuente treat going?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah,
it's great smoke.
You a fan of a darker cigar then?
Maduro, a little bit more flavor, lots of pepper. I'm a My Father fan. I'm just that's just one of my favorites.
To each his own, I guess. I do like Padrones, but lately I've been getting on an Ave Maria kick. So the Reconquistas, the Davillas, more mild, but man, those things burn even forever. And you just let it sit, come back an hour later, and you still got a cherry going on it. So
right.
I've been enjoying those. Let's touch on PCI. I'm sure PCI was a big focus while you're at Blockbuster. And kind of everywhere. I mean, PCI is I see it being regarded in both companies that are subject to it, as well as companies that aren't. They're viewing that as like, hey, it seems like a generally good framework. How do you feel that they're keeping up? I mean, there's some teeth with PCI. Right, I mean, you can end a business if you fail to comply. I mean, if you get revoked from Visa, MasterCard, Discover, you can be hurting. So, how do you think PCI has been progressing as a framework from 1 to 3? I mean, in terms of controls and actually improving security posture.
Well, good question. So they go into start out with version 1.0 back in early 2000s. They are now on version 4.0. Starts this next January. And then they have prescriptive requirements which kind of give you good guidance and good understanding of what is expected as far as the outcome of whatever control that you're working with. They do a good job of talking and getting feedback from their consumers, from technical boards, working groups, special interest groups. They have a lot of people that work for the progression of PCI and what PCI means to the community. And they've done a great job, at least from my perspective, as far as moving forward. They're always talking about the newest innovations as far as where people are storing their data, such as cloud, how they're using their data, and just the use of everything. And so how they do that is they achieve feedback, take that, and then identify sort of working papers, white papers, not necessarily specific rules, but just white papers as far as guidance, and then eventually it'll move into requirements, into the next version of PCI. So you can look at that from their POS terminals. You can look at that from how they handle multi-factor authentication. Before it was just multi-factor authentication from remote users. Now it's any multi-factor from administrators, logging onto their computers, things like that.
I've had these kind of philosophical debates with many recovering QSAs, as you call yourself, and
myself, Jason.
Yep, and I think they're doing a good job of pointing out the fundamentals, but I don't know if I agree with them kind of keeping up with the technology advancements. So you still see calls for like IDS, IPS, but there's no mitigating or compensating control for anomaly detection. You really have to make your case to the board. Have you seen anything coming down the pipe, or have you seen any difference in their thought process around allowing some of these newer controls that may not be the named control acting as a compensating control to allow organizations to be a little bit more aggressive in their pursuit of bleeding edge technology while still maintaining their compliance?
Well, whenever we're talking about compensating controls, as long as that control is above and beyond what the expectation is, that's what they're looking for. So when they're looking at newer technology, such as when Silence came out, and the understanding of how Silence worked, because before it was antivirus and downloading signatures. Well, Silence really doesn't deal with signatures, right? So we have to use that as a compensating control and understand how it works and be able to put that in and explain why it goes above and beyond what the expectation of PCI controls are. They don't like to deal with bleeding edge because bleeding edge doesn't really work well with controls until it's mature and really is, we understand how everything works, which is why they have this feedback and they have the white papers and guidance until they understand how all the different technology works. Right now, but they handle the main areas very well, which are penetration testing and scan-in, web application scan-in. They make sure that log monitoring is there. I don't agree with that they go far enough in their log monitoring because they allow just to filter their logs as opposed to resolving all their alerts. That's a main issue with me as a QS when I was a QSA, and I continue to expound on the fact that companies don't monitor enough of their alerts.
Yeah, I think most people would agree with that. What's the point of generating alerts if you can't look at them? Right. I liken it to, hey, you got a Lamborghini in the garage, but if you're pulling it out in first gear and taking it up and down the street and parking it again, why do you need a Lamborghini?
Exactly.
So, when you were an assessor, and big difference between auditor and assessor, right? Yep. Auditors checking boxes, assessors are trying to actually ensure that the control is meeting the intent.
The intent.
Right. So when you were looking at compensating controls, how stringent were you on making sure that they proved the intent? I mean, is this I get this question a lot from customers. Is this a long process where I have to go through multiple levels of justification, or can I show that this is fulfilling the intent of the control and quickly move on? Like, what is that process of compensating?
So it depends upon the assessor, right? So because of course the assessor and the assessing company have to sign off on it. But really what it really comes down to is understanding, again, when I go back to understanding how the data is used, understanding the risk to the data and the risk to somebody potentially gaining unauthorized access to that data. And if you don't understand that, then you basically come back to checking boxes, regardless of if it's a compensating control or not. If you don't understand how the data is used or how the technology is used, it's a moot point.
Very good. And I think that blends into my last question. And this is a debate that I've been having for a while now. And I'm going to be careful on how I word this. I've seen a trend that I'm not a huge fan of security pivoting more towards compliance rather than risk mitigation. And if you think about what security is the art of accepting or mitigating risk, right? You have to quantify your risk and then you choose your kind of tactics for dealing with that. What I'm seeing in some organizations is more of a pursuit of checkboxes rather than a pursuit of risk mitigation. So when you ask a CISO or a director or somebody like that, you say, why are you putting this in place? they don't have a dollar value. They don't have, it's just, well, this is what's necessary. It's a checkbox. It's on ISO, it's on SANS, it's on NIST, it's on, whatever. Insert your favorite framework here. So where do you see compliance versus actual risk mitigation, and what are your kind of recommendations to customers looking to implement and adhere to a compliance standard while still making measurable improvements to their security posture?
Again, it kind of goes back to what we were first talking about before. Are you going to be tactical, or are you going to be strategic about it? You're either going to pay me now or pay me later, but the time between now and later could be, after my stint as a CISO, let's say, at that organization. So I don't necessarily care, because all I care about is my time there, that I, make sure that nothing happens, and then, so I'm just doing checkboxes. I don't have to have that conversation of, this is really what we should do, how to secure the data, gain trust with the companies. Now, when we get into organizations or companies that are trying to sell a product, a little bit different. Now we have to think about it not from a compliance standpoint, but from a strategic standpoint, so that we can sit there and move with the market, and also pivot with the market, and also pivot with the expectations of when companies, third parties, want us to use data or sign contracts with different terms and conditions. That if we know exactly how our data is used, we can respond very quickly, as opposed to going back and trying to do a lot of research and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think I saw, maybe a couple of years ago, more of a shift to modify the intent of the control to meet what the business was delivering, instead of modify what the business was doing to meet the intent of the control.
Correct.
And I think you've kind of pointed out that that businesses, now that everything is now interconnected and everybody is in each other's privacy business in terms of what are you doing with my data, I think that's going to be harder to do, if not impossible, for people to say like, oh no, we segmented our PCI zone, it's only these 4 computers. Yeah, but where else is that data ending up? That's in scope too.
So as these privacy laws get a lot more mature, and you have assessors that really know what they're doing, the strategic look will come out, and that's when you'll have to pay the piper. Because if you don't know how your data is used, I mean, think about the cloud now. So people put it on Dropbox, not maliciously, but I want to go home and I want to work on it. So
convenience.
So convenience.
Yep.
So they're putting it on Dropbox. Do I know about it as a company? Usually not. Or they're putting it on other places, remote media, storing it on their laptop. You may think you're protected, but if you're just taking a chance if you don't even know it's there.
Yeah. So what you're saying is, know where your data is, apply your compliance there, and that will inherently increase your security posture, instead of just checking the boxes where you can kind of circumvent the process.
100%. And then as a board, when you're reporting to the board, and are you going to be, I think we're protected, as opposed to, I know exactly we are or we're not, and being able to have those conversations. And that's what, again, this goes back to why I'm excited about being in GRC and compliance, because having those conversations, educating people, the executives, and them understanding why we're putting these strategic items in place.
Awesome. Great. Sanjay, thanks for the information. Great perspective, great information, great detail. Clearly know your stuff, and really appreciate you sharing. That's it for our episode today. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. If you have any feedback, please leave it. Happy to take it. If you have any suggestions for topics that we should cover in the future, or if you or somebody you know enjoys a nice cigar and can really help progress the conversation in security, look me up on LinkedIn and send me a message. I'd be happy to bring you on the show, either in person or remotely. That's it for us. Have a great 4th of July. Enjoy the weekend. Be safe, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks, guys.